Okay, so I'm here to review Love and Mercy, a movie about one of the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson. But I can't wear this shirt. There's no way I can review a movie about the Beach Boys, or one of them, while wearing a Beatles shirt. So I think we need to change the shirt. Okay, better, but I've worn this shirt too often on this show. I actually don't have a Beach Boys shirt, but let's change it to something that I haven't worn in a while that would remind people of the beach. Much better! There we go! Has nothing to do with the Beach Boys at all, but hey, sharks remind people of the beach. Now let's review this movie. Now, after that ridiculous pre-title sequence, here's my review for Love and Mercy. Love and Mercy tells the story about Brian Wilson, who's most famous for being a member of the Beach Boys, and it tells his story in between two time periods. In the 60s, he's played by Paul Dano, and in the 80s, he's played by John Cusack. In the 1960s, it tells the story of how Brian Wilson leaves the days of concert touring to make possibly the greatest studio album ever made. And in the 80s, it focuses on the meeting of his second wife, Melinda, played by Elizabeth Banks, and his relationship with Dr. Eugene Landy, played by Paul Giamatti. Now, I'm a mild fan of the Beach Boys, and I'm not just saying that because I wore a Beatles shirt. The Beach Boys was a band that I knew well enough of, and whenever I hear their music, I really get into it, but never really went out of my way to collect the music. So I came into this movie really not knowing a whole much about the band's history, or at least the history of Brian Wilson, and I was pretty impressed with what I saw. This movie goes into detail about his life, the troubles he went with in both time periods, the 1960s where he's kind of departing from his bands, his ego's rising, and he kind of wants to not do concert tours anymore. And then in the 80s where he meets his second wife, Melinda, and just this awful relationship he has with Dr. Eugene Landy, and it was really intense to watch, both sides of the story. I was more interested in the 1980s segments because the main reason is because of Paul Giamatti, who is just horrible in this movie, but in the best way possible. Acting-wise, he's fantastic, but he plays Dr. Eugene Landy in a way that you just want to grab a baseball bat and just whack him over the head until his head comes off. He is just that horrible, and I don't endorse that kind of violence, but in the movie, it really makes you feel that way. A lot of the actors do a really good job also. John Cusack is good as the older Brian Wilson from the 1980s, even though there are a few moments, just a few seconds where he just doesn't seem like he's all there, but after really thinking about it, it's that's kind of what he was going through at the time, so I can forgive that. And Elizabeth Banks is really good as Melinda, as the girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, that sticks by Brian's side and tries to help him through this enormous struggle. I really liked it. The 1960s is actually where I had my main issues with. While I think the movie's overall good, and I would definitely recommend it to people, and Paul Dano is really good as the younger Brian Wilson, there are parts in it where the storytelling is kind of uneven. The transitions it makes from the 60s to the 80s kind of don't really match. It feels like there are two movies going on at the same time, which, that's fine, they're two different time periods, but I would like there to be at least some connection. We learn this stuff about Brian from the 60s, that transitions into something we knew back in the 80s and makes it a lot more powerful. But the biggest problem I had with the 1960s segment, while it looks really good, the camera work on some of the emotional scenes are terrible, absolutely awful. There are two scenes that I can recall where there's a dramatic moment between Brian Wilson and one of the other characters, and for some weird, God only knows reason, the camera is shaking, and it's filmed from behind a window, and for some reason, half of the frame is completely black. It's covered by a pillar, but it's not like in The Office where you see behind the window shades. It's literally half of the frame is covered in black, like this. And it's just so irritating. Here's what it's like watching it. Brian, you gotta just get back in the moment with us. This was a flop, just move on to something else. You gotta just be with the band. It'll be all good, man. Trust me on this. This will be the greatest album in the world. That's not actual dialogue, but I'm just exaggerating to give you an idea that it's a dramatic moment where the camera's shaking and half the frame is cut off. Like, it is so distracting. But at the end of the day, it is a movie that I can recommend, especially if you're a fan of Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. I think it's definitely an interesting movie that you should check out. And it's really kind of eye-opening to the life of one of the greatest musicians ever. So I'm going to say that Love and Mercy is worth seeing in your lifetime. It's well filmed, the acting's great. There are those annoying moments with the camera work during the dramatic moments in the 60s, but in the end, I still think it's a good movie regardless of that. And that's my review for Love and Mercy. Leave a comment and tell me what you thought of the movie if you've seen it. What did you think? Like, subscribe, share me with your friends, and this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there is only one.